my thought for today is that we talk about a couple of things. We talk about, first off, the coming digital LSAT starting this summer and then into the fall, and some of the other policy changes happening from LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, this year. Because 2019 is kind of a big year for the LSAT as it goes digital. It's been paper and pencil basically forever, since 1948, including its modern formation in June 1991. And so you're used to those booklets, those books of 10 exams. But starting this summer in July specifically, half of students will get the digital format on the tablet, half will get paper and pencil. LSAC chooses for you, and you don't get any advance notice at all. So that's kind of a crazy circumstance, and I certainly wouldn't want to be in that situation myself, but it is what it is, and we'll make the best of it. If you really want to take the paper and pencil format, then I would suggest starting with the June LSAT and taking that. That's only 2 months out, though, and I know you all have been in this LSAT class. You've been studying for a while, and so you could well be fully prepared for June if you buckle down for the few weeks after the semester ends. So I would say try for that if you want the paper, if that's important to you. Otherwise, don't worry about it and go for the digital version instead, whether it's in July or the fall and beyond. So June is paper, July you might get either format, then in the fall it's 100% digital on the tablet specifically. So those are just a few things to be aware of. And when I talk about tablet, I really do mean tablet. The GMAT and the GRE, I believe they're on the actual desktop computer or a laptop. The LSAT will actually be on a tablet, specifically a Microsoft Surface Go tablet. And so I'm not saying you have to get that exact tablet, but it would be a worthwhile investment for you to get some kind of tablet, maybe an iPad, maybe a Samsung Galaxy. The Samsungs are around $200-300, which I think is well worth the investment, even if it is something else additional to shell out for. Because if that level of comfort you get on the tablet gets you even one more point on the LSAT, that could lead to thousands of dollars in scholarship money, or even potentially getting into a better law school. So in my opinion, it really is a no-brainer to go for the tablet if you're able to make the investment or find someone who's able to help you out with that. In the June LSAT, despite the fact that the June LSAT is paper and pencil, there will actually be a digital writing sample. So that's kind of funny, actually, that you'll be doing the 5 LSAT scored sections at the test center, but then at home on your own time for up to 1 year after your actual LSAT test administration, you'll be able to do the writing sample from home on your own computer. They'll monitor it with a webcam and a microphone to make sure it's really you for test security purposes. They'll have you hold up your government ID to the camera, again, to verify it's really you. And they're really just doing this to verify your English fluency if they have any concerns about someone being a non-native speaker or someone who might not have written their own law school personal statement. That's kind of why they do that. But it's really not worth devoting too much attention to it, although I do think that law schools will devote a little bit more attention to it on their end, just because it will be more legible than your handwriting chicken scratch after 5 sections of LSAT stuff. So take it seriously, put some effort into it, but you could spend 20 to 25 minutes typing it and then spend the remainder just kind of double checking for typos and misspellings and things like that. But I wouldn't place too much importance on it. The other big policy change I think that you want to think about is the fact that LSAC has removed the limit on the number of times you can take the LSAT. It used to be that you could only take it 3 times in a 2-year period. And I don't really know why they had that rule, but they removed it to be more student friendly. Now there's no limit on how many times you could take it. You could take it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And I actually think you might want to consider taking it 3 or more times. I know that sounds crazy and you don't want to spend so much time on the LSAT. You want to move on with your life. But again, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores and they only take the highest, even just a point or 2 more on the LSAT could get you scholarship money or even a full ride or get you into a better law school. And so you look at the ROI on that, getting into a top 14 or graduating debt-free, the value of that is enormous. And it's a funny thing because LSAT scores, they're numbers, they're supposed to be valid data, but there's variation, obviously. You see that your practice scores might fluctuate based on how you're doing that day or what might come up on that particular LSAT exam. So let's say that your actual test average is a 155 or a 160. Let's just say it's a 160. There's a score band or a margin of error of 3.5 points on either end, meaning that one day you could get a 164. Another day, you could get a 156, even if your average is a 160. But obviously, a 164 will open far more doors for you than a 160 would. And obviously, a 157 or 156 is not desirable either. But you could take it 3 different times and get all 3 of those different scores. But law schools take you as if you had only ever gotten the 164. They don't care about the 157. They don't care about the 160. And so you maximize your odds of getting that higher end just by taking it more times. So to me, that seems like a no-brainer. And the funny thing about the LSAT being offered more frequently going forward, you may know that the LSAT's now offered 9-10 times a year, as opposed to previously having only been offered 4 times a year. So there are more and more opportunities to retake. And the June and July LSATs coming up this year, there's only a 5-6 week gap in between them, which is a very small gap relative to how it used to be. It used to be a 3-month gap. So now, let's say you go for June. It's June 3rd this year. You take it. You have no clue how you did because, of course, you have to wait 3 weeks to get your score back. You could just do one timed exam per week over the 5 to 6 week period in between those 2 LSAT test dates. Then take it in July. Maybe you do 3 to 4 points better. Maybe you remain the same. Maybe you go down a couple points. There's really no downside because they'll only take the highest. You get 3 to 4 points higher. You apply with that. You're good. Or maybe you take it in June and July, and then you take it again in the fall. There's 3 LSAT test dates in the fall, back to back, September, October, November, only 1 month apart from each other. So once again, only a 4-week gap maybe in that case. No reason not to stay fresh on it. Just do one timed exam a week and review it. And that's enough. You can still have some balance in your life and have other things going on, whether it's another semester this fall or you're working or whatever it is. You've got the time. It's not that much more additional effort, maybe another 10 hours a week for those 4 or 5 weeks. I think it's well worth it. It's funny, you think about it. Your LSAT score you earn in a single day, but your undergraduate GPA takes you 4 years, yet your LSAT score is weighted more heavily, even though it takes less time to get it. So a lot of times people will study for only 2 to 3 months and be done with it when it weighs more heavily than the undergraduate GPAs. And so I think it's worth devoting 5 to 6 months for this if you need it and taking it at least 2 or 3 times. I think that the stigma around retakes is really going away. Law schools, again, only have incentive to take the highest score because that's all they have to submit to the American Bar Association. That's all that's factored into the US News rankings, which everyone values very heavily. So that's a quick run through of what's kind of the changes that are happening so far this year. Happy to take any questions at all about the digital LSAT, what I said about averages and retaking and stuff like that. Anyone taken the LSAT before? Anyone looking to retake? Everyone's taking it for the first time? Nice. Cool. Okay. Well, that's good because you have many more opportunities going forward. You can take it now in June and you can still take it 3 more times and it won't look weird. It's kind of funny. Everyone's very concerned about this idea of retaking, but the people I hear from, they've taken it 2, 3, 4 times. They've taken one of the big prep company classes in the past. They're trying out self-study. They're trying a different approach. It's totally normal. When is everyone taking the LSAT? You all taking it in June or July or in the fall? How many people are taking it in June? All right, so we've got a couple folks there. How many folks taking it in July? So we have a pretty good mix. It looks like we've got a handful of people taking in June and July. So I'd say, honestly, I think all of you should consider taking it for both of those test administrations, or at least those of you doing June should definitely do July as well. Because if you feel like you'll be ready by June, again, just staying fresh for another couple of weeks or a month or so. Now, I suppose one thing I could talk about is how to structure your LSAT study schedule. That's something I think a lot about. I focus on helping students who are looking to self-study. I consider self-study to have 3 phases to it. There's accuracy, working untimed. Then there's pacing, which is individual timed sections. Then there's endurance with full-length 5-section exams. So accuracy, untimed, then pacing, then endurance. I know you're all doing this prep class already at college, and so I won't try to overlap with whatever is going on there, but I will say that too many times people jump right into doing full-length timed exams, measuring the results, being happy or sad about them, and then moving on to the next thing. And that's, it's obviously it's understandable that you want to see where you stand. You want that instant feedback. Maybe you can't even wait until you finish the full 4-section exam before looking section by section, but that's not where the value is. The value is not in simply doing exam after exam after exam and then measuring your results. Of course, you're getting more exposure to more LSAT material. But at the same time, you run the risk of burning through that recent material and not fully learning from it. The value in doing a timed exam or doing any material really is not to measure your accuracy or even to see your weak areas. The value is in finding your weak areas and then reviewing them in depth. You might just say, well, I got a lot of flaw questions wrong, or I got a lot of necessary assumptions questions wrong, but that might simply be because there are a lot of them to get wrong. They appear disproportionately on the exam relative to other question types. And it's also not all about the question type in particular. It may also be the method of reasoning. It may also be patterns in wrong answer choices or right answer choices. And so the way that I review LSAT questions with students involves going into excruciating detail, looking at where exactly your misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it in the method of reasoning in the stimulus? Was it in the wording of the question stem and how you interpreted it? Or was it in the answer choices? So we have these traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer and traps of discouragement away from the right answer. And there are patterns in how LSAC structures these, how they write them. And your mistake may not be in the answer choices. Like I said, it may be in the stimulus or the question stem, but you've got to figure out exactly where it came from so that you can avoid making that same mistake in the future. There might be 1,000 tricks or traps on the LSAT, and you're not falling for all of them, or else you'd be getting a 120, and presumably you're doing a bit better than that. But even if not, that's okay too. But the bottom line is that it's about figuring out which specific tricks and traps you fall for so you can avoid making them in the future, because the LSAT really does repeat itself again and again and again. You could study from nothing more than 10 exams alone ever, and there's 86 numbered ones now. Using only the 10 most recent ones, that could be enough. I'd recommend doing more, of course. I'd recommend doing maybe 20 or 30 ideally, and having 10 of those be strictly timed, full-length 5-section exams, using the other 10 or 20 for building your foundation first. And so again, back to the foundation, the accuracy, first phase of LSAT studying, what do? You want to work untimed, doing the questions by type. I recommend typically starting with games because it's the hardest seeming at first, but it's actually the lowest hanging fruit. So you start with games, but not just games in general. You start with the easiest LSAT logic games type, which I consider to be ordering or sequencing, depending on your terminology, doing the ordering games first, and starting with the easiest ordering games, then the moderate ordering games, then the difficult ordering games, then moving on to the easiest grouping games, moderate grouping games, difficult grouping games, and then on to the harder ones from there, like the combination games and curveballs and weird ones and rare ones and pattern ones and all of those extras that come later. But start with the easiest, work through to the more difficult, working by type. Then do the same for logical reasoning. There's a dozen logical reasoning question types or more. Do those by type. I have categorizations for those on my site. There are other categorizations online as well, but work by question type just so you get a sense of the proper perspective from which to view the stimulus. And then for reading comp, the topics don't matter quite as much because there's only 4 major categories of reading comprehension passages, but get a sense, of course, for what your weak areas are and maybe do some additional outside reading just to gain some familiarity with the kinds of topics that tend to come up. People often ask about for reading comp going to outside material like The Economist or Scientific American. And I'd say if that's great for your commute, like or you want to do some casual side reading, that's fine. But ultimately, best to stick with the actual LSAT passages because there's hundreds of them. Now, I talked about the untimed accuracy foundational portion. You do that first. Then you move on to individual timed sections to work on pacing. And so that is especially important for logical reasoning where there's a clear general order of difficulty, kind of figuring out how to avoid getting bogged down on certain question types or certain tough questions, then hopefully coming back to them later. But it's very important for the games and reading comp also, since there is an average of 8 minutes and 45 seconds per game and per passage, but not all of them are of equal difficulty. And so kind of getting used to going faster on some, slower on others, I think is enormously valuable. And of course, the LSAT does have a strict time component. It's worth getting used to that. Now, if you have ADHD or some other reason that you might want special testing accommodations, I would recommend seeking that out and seeking it out as soon as possible because LSAC is a bureaucracy. They move slowly. it takes time before they make a decision on you, and you want to be all squared away for June or July or whenever you're taking it. And so go to the doctor, get that note, have that documentation. If you had extra time for the SAT or ACT, or you had extra time in college, that will certainly help your case. If not, it may be a bit tougher to get, but it's worth it. There's no notation on your file that you had extra time, and getting time and a half or double time is huge. Going from 35 minutes to 70 minutes or 35 to 53 for a single section, the benefit for you on that is enormous. And so I definitely recommend seeking it out if it might apply to your situation. If not, of course, make the best of it, but do make sure to do a lot of time to work and don't wait till the last minute to do the time to work. Then the final phase will be endurance, doing full-length 5-section exams. This is really, really important to do 5 sections, not 4. The published prep tests are only 4 because they, of course, do not give you the experimental section. They save that for later for use in a future LSAT administration. And so let's say you're doing exams 83, 84, 85, and 86 in timed settings over the course of a 4-week period. You might take exam 82 and cut it into 4 parts and splice in each one of those 4 parts into 83, 84, 85, and 86. And then later tabulate your results for what 82 might have been had you taken it as a separate timed exam.
How to prepare for the digital? You mentioned that they should get a tablet if possible, but then there's not much available online in terms of practice.
For the digital LSAT, on LSAC's website, familiar.lsac.org, you can find all of LSAT Prep Test 73, which is a very recent exam. It's from after, it's like 2012 or 2014, something like that. And so that's one exam. And so if you consider another LSAT course, just make sure that they fully have the digital format integrated. So they have LSAT Prep Tests interactive in that style. I could go on LSAC's site right now and show you what it looks like. Have you all seen it yet?
You have seen it? No, you haven't been there? All right, I guess not.
Cool. All right. Well, I will pull that up on my computer and hope that I don't reveal anything embarrassing by accident. So this is LSAC's site. I definitely recommend going here and checking it out, familiar.lsac.org. And I saw a lot of you were going for July, and you might get this format, so you definitely want to see what it looks like. They have some videos that are really boring. I wouldn't recommend watching those, but they have some practice problems. So you could see here the instructions, and they're kind of showing you what you can do. You can select choices, you can mark for review, you can navigate, highlight, underline. Let's just dive right in. So this is like a logical reasoning question, or maybe even the first question of a game. This is the stimulus, if it's logical reasoning, the question stem, the answer choices. There are a lot of cool features on here that I actually think are not worth using. So you can underline stuff. You can see how I'm underlining. You can erase what you underlined if you kind of click around there. You can highlight as well. You can highlight in different colors. I think all of these features are just a huge waste of time. Your system might differ, and you can play around with it and see what you like, what you don't. But I personally don't think there's a huge benefit to any of this. I think this is kind of like technology being used for technology's sake rather than it actually being valuable. As you can see, it's a kind of tough to actually erase, even though I was trying to. It took me a few seconds there. You can make the text larger if you want. You can make it really large. You can make it small. Those are, I think, meant more for people who have like eyesight issues. You can also theoretically increase or decrease the brightness, although I don't think it works on desktop. But you can do this all on the computers I'm doing right now. But I'd say the best thing to do is, of course, do it on a tablet or even a smartphone. If you have one of those really big smartphones like a Google Pixel, that could be good too. So try around, play with it. I would definitely recommend, though, getting a stylus, which is like a pen for a tablet, because that's what you're going to be using on test day. One other thing I suppose I should show you is choosing a choice. You see I clicked A and then it went on the bottom left there. You can also eliminate an answer choice. Like I'm eliminating E or crossing it off. You see it's eliminated there now as well. You can also flag a question. So if I wanted to flag this one, you see now there's a little flag next to number 1. So those are some cool features. I guess the countdown timer is a mixed bag. You have it counting down for the whole 35 minutes per section, but once the 5-minute warning hits, you can't remove the countdown timer. And so that's an additional thing I would suggest, again, getting used to, because it can be a little nerve-wracking maybe. And you see there's even more questions here. You can see as they get lengthier what it looks like. You kind of have to scroll down. But this is a bit different than paper and pencil. And I guess I'm kind of feeling old now because I don't love this. But for those of you who are younger and more into tech, this could be a good thing maybe. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. A few other things I suppose I should mention about July specifically are that the July LSAT will let you see your score before you decide whether to cancel, which is unique. Usually you don't get to see that. This is kind of like SAT score choice. But again, because law schools don't average multiple scores, there's not really a reason to cancel in any case. If you do cancel July, though, they'll give you a free retake. So that's $190 of value if you might want that. Something to think about. But again, never really a reason to cancel, in my opinion, unless it went horribly, horribly wrong, like something like an earthquake or a tornado hit, something like that. Now, you were asking about how to prep for the digital LSAT specifically. Aside from, of course, wanting to do LSAT problems in this interactive style, I suppose another thing you'd want to be thinking about is how to modify your actual approach. Because if you're doing it paper and pencil, you're probably used to writing on the page, underlining and highlighting physically with a pen or pencil. You can't do that anymore, of course, on digital. So you'll have to do all the work on scrap paper. So yes, there will be scrap paper. There won't really be a severe limit on it as far as I know. So you won't get only one page. You might get 5 pages or 10 pages, whatever you get, it'll probably be enough for you. But you have to get used to doing all your work to the side and kind of looking back and forth. And so you think for games, if you're used to doing it on the page or reading comp, you're used to underlining actual physically on the passage, you can't do that anymore. So this is kind of the opposite of everything I previously would have ever suggested for test prep. And so it's kind of requiring me and other test prep folks to kind of modify our approaches and what we recommend. And so definitely make sure, again, when you seek out additional LSAT prep, that the people you're seeking it from know about the digital LSAT and are modifying their strategies accordingly. I think this will matter a lot more for games than anything else. And you want to really get used to, with games, having an organized system for how you diagram your main diagram and then your individual hypotheticals for particular LSAT questions. So maybe on the scrap paper, you always want to do your main diagram on the top left and then number one by one on like the right hand, going down the right hand side of the page for individual question diagrams. So those are my general thoughts on digital LSAT prep, but happy to elaborate further.
So to be clear, there will be a stylet, but also scrap tape paper to do diagrams. So they don't have to practice drawing diagrams on a tablet.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. I suppose I should have made that more clear. On the tablet, you cannot draw freehand at all. They give you a stylus to let you kind of do those little things I did with the mouse just there, like to modify some of the highlighting and underlining and stuff, but you can't actually draw the way you would, let's say, on a whiteboard. And so I'll kind of pull up a whiteboard here for contrast.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Let's say if you did have a whiteboard, you could kind of do all this, right? But on the digital LSAT, you can't do any of that. So it's a very different experience, of course. Like on the digital LSAT, you're not able to do any of those things. It's really just limited to, once again, kind of clicking around with what I'm doing here. There's no little like pen icon like there was on the whiteboard where I could actually draw freehand. There's none of that. So it's very restricted on the digital LSAT. And so that is something else to get used to, since if you've been used to doing it differently, of course, on the paper.
That's very helpful. Other questions?
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
Do law schools see the scores, even if you take them multiple times? Do they end up
they see all your
seeing
scores.
the lower scores?
Yeah.
And is that ever to a detriment, or does it just not matter because you don't get the highest one?
It doesn't matter because they only take your highest one. But yes, they will see every score that you have on record. They time out after 5 years, though. So let's say you took it in 2019 and you got a 120. Let's say you just totally misbubbled and they couldn't fix it or anything like that. Obviously, you could explain that in an addendum, but if you didn't want law schools to ever know you got the 120, you could wait 5 years to apply and get a clean slate. But let's say you're like most people, let's say you're taking it June, July, and September, and maybe June was lower than you wanted it to be. It'll be on your record, but not a big deal. Again, because they don't average multiple scores.
If you have a very bad score and then you take it again and your score didn't move, then they start to see a pattern of someone who is not capable of changing their habits or changing their methods when they want to achieve something. That's the only thing I've heard, that it could hurt your application if you have a pattern of bad scores in a row.
That's a good point. I think that definitely if you have 3 155s in a row, then it probably indicates that 155 is where you stand, and maybe there won't be that much more you're going to do to change that. But if you do prep totally different for attempt number 4 and you got a 170, law schools like to see 170. It helps them in the rankings, and they are self-interested. Law school admission officers, they're their jobs really do rest on keeping their schools ranking as high as possible. And so they're not incentivized to penalize you for the previous 155s. Now, of course, a single 155 and a 170 is better than 3 155s and a 170, but you are where you are, you apply with what you've got. And if you can get the 170, I say get it, even if it takes you another year, because going to a lower ranked school with a 155 versus waiting a year and going to a tier 1 school with a 170, that's a very different situation to be in. So I think, especially for those of you who are younger, a year doesn't really mean that much of a delay at all. And even if you're older, you probably have more time because, of course, you've waited this long. What's another year?
Other questions? Yeah.
Can you go over like the canceling scores? I'm a little confused on that. Like, so if you get your score immediately afterwards, and then you can just completely just say, I don't want that.
That's a great question. So typically, under most circumstances, for the vast majority, for every single test administration except July, you have 6 calendar days approximately before you decide whether to cancel. You can cancel at the test center. I wouldn't recommend it because, of course, you might be your temper might be high or something. You might be feeling kind of stressed out. Take a few days, think about it. Like I said, there's never really a reason to cancel. But for most test administrations except July, you will not be able to see your score before deciding whether to cancel. Even for the digital LSAT going forward for like the fall, let's say September, October, November, even though it's digital and you might think it's a multiple choice test, why can't they just give you your score immediately, right? It's kind of crazy, but they don't. They want to do all kinds of detailed statistical analysis to make sure the exam raw score conversions performed as they expected. Basically, they want to make sure that test takers performed as they thought they would in their trials when they tested out those questions as experimentals previously. So even with the digital LSAT, you will have to wait 3 weeks before getting your score back. Now, for July specifically, they're letting you, after that three-week gap, see your score before deciding whether to cancel. Now, I think the only reason they're doing this is as kind of an olive branch to test takers, because the digital transition is scary for some folks. It's new. There's not that much out there about it. And so for that reason, I think that it's kind of nice of them to do that. But at the same time, it's creating more confusion than is really necessary, because there's never really a reason to cancel. That's an artifact from back when law schools did average multiple LSAT scores. But that policy changed back in 2006 when the American Bar Association said to law schools, we don't need the average of your students anymore. We only want the highest. And then US News only gets the highest. And so everything kind of changed around that. But law school and LSAC are both kind of bureaucratic old institutions that are very slow to adopt any kind of change, including technology. And so this kind of goes along with that, whereas they're still kind of offering cancellations and still kind of putting that option out there uniquely for July. You take the GMAT, you take the GRE, you get your score immediately on the computer. LSAT is just totally different, but maybe one day. Yeah, question?
Is the tablet big enough to have like the reading comprehension passage open while you're doing questions, or do you need to flip back and forth?
That's a great question. We can actually go look at it right now. Why not, right? Let's go and see what it looks like. So we've got a passage here. This is from test 73. We've got some questions here as well. And you can see that I've got to scroll down, right? You can't see the whole thing at once. That's what it'll be like on the tablet. But let's see if we then go on to the next question. Yeah, the passage is still there, but you don't have your previous questions in front of you. So you have to kind of flip between them, but you could also flip down. You could click down at the bottom left as well. Now, if we go back to games, if you want to see what that looks like, we go to a game. Once again, the initial paragraph and the rules are there. We have one question here. We can go ahead to questions 2, question 3, 4, 5, and so on. But you don't have your previous questions in front of you. And you might think, well, your work would have been down here at the bottom. But in reality, of course, you're going to have it in your scrap paper on the side. So you will still be able to look at question 4's work, even though we're now on question 5. Other questions?
Yeah, so if you're averaging like a 160 and you go in for the July test and you get a 157 and you're planning on taking other tests and you think you can do better, do you think it's worthwhile to cancel your 157 since you have a couple more chances and you think you might be able to do better?
July in particular would be the only case where you actually knew you had the 157. And so if your average was a 160, you got 157, you think you could do better? I'd say still keep it, because a 160 practice test average may not necessarily be a 160 test day performance, because there's test day anxiety and stress, which are real. There's the nerves of having it be the real thing. So even if you got a 160 on your own at home, or even in a proctored setting when it's not the real thing, that may not necessarily translate to test day. And so I do think there's a certain security in having the 157 on record. The exception to that would be if you knew that under no circumstances would you ever want to apply to law school with a 157 and nothing else higher beyond that. So let's say you want a tier 1, you want a top 14, and let's say your GPA isn't that high. You obviously need a higher LSAT score. And so in that case, maybe you want to cancel it, but also consider that a cancellation for law schools is like a big question mark. For all they know, that was a 140, right? So a 157 isn't nearly as bad in comparison. And a 157 actually is maybe not what you want it to be, but it is higher than the median. The median LSAT score is a 151. So I'd say, you can hear I'm in New York City with all the sirens, right? So a 157 is actually not bad. So I'd say maybe you do want to keep it on your record.
So they see that you canceled it if you do cancel?
That's the thing, yeah. So if you take the LSAT, you either will end up at the end with a score on record or cancellation. If you want to avoid that, let's say you're taking in June or July and the week before or the day before something awful happens, or you find that your practice test scores were never close to what you wanted it to be. You could withdraw from that test, meaning you don't show up, you don't go in, you don't take the test, and law schools will never even know that you were registered. So that's a great option, I think, if you feel like you're just not going to be where you want to be on test day itself. I would go for that. The downside of a withdrawal is that they keep your money. They keep your money for that LSAT test day administration. An alternative is about 3 weeks before the test, there is a postponement deadline. So let's say 1 month out or 3.5 weeks before, you decide that you're not going to be ready, you can withdraw and they'll only, you can postpone, and they'll only keep some of your money. They'll give some back that you could then apply to a future test date. Other questions? Yeah, question, please.
He asked in your own teaching, using the new online system, how did you deal with the fact that you can't see all the questions at once for the reading comprehension in terms of choosing which questions to answer first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that you've got to flip around. I mean, if you're taking the digital LSAT, I want to prep you like it's going to be the digital LSAT. I wouldn't want to give you something that doesn't fully mimic that. Now, obviously, most exams are not digital at the moment, so you can use the books of exams and see what they look like as far as the layout's concerned. I don't think it's that big a deal to have to flip around on the tablet. As you saw, it's as simple as clicking on the computer, or obviously on test day, you'll be using the stylus. So I would just kind of flip back and forth between them. I think with my strategies, and we won't have time to get into all that now, but I do sometimes skip around, like let's say for reading comprehension, I'd want to do the general main point questions before I do the more detail-oriented questions. And so I kind of click to see what's coming later first and then go back. So let's say for reading comp, if there were a super difficult inference question or a question involving line references, and I hadn't yet done the general questions, I would flip and look to do those first and then come back to the other ones later. And then same for games. I might want to do certain games questions before others. But I think in reading comp is where really you want to do the most jumping around. But I'd say click around on the tablet and flip around on when you're using the book. I don't think it's really that different. But obviously, once more digital LSAT materials are available, LSAC will be doing some more as well in the future. I hope soon they'll be putting more LSATs in this style so you can play with them as it'll actually be on test day.
And if I remember correctly on what we just saw, you could also see at the bottom, could you see how many questions were associated with each of the passages so that you can choose a passage that has a lot of questions associated with it? I think you could see that at the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's correct. For the digital LSAT, and I'll jump back there really quickly. You can see here that for the game there, the first game has 7 questions. The last game has 5 questions. You can see on the bottom there. And so that's kind of nice of them to do that. And the same is true for
so if you go for a 3 out of 4 strategy, then you probably want to consider that when you choose which games or which passages you're going to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. That might be one strategy, especially if you're only looking to do 3. Yeah.
Right.
I have on my website, the LSAT blog, I have free week-by-week study plans where I lay out exactly what to do every single week over the course of your prep for any study timeline, 1 month through 7 months. I also have more detailed premium day-by-day study plans laying out exactly which articles to read on my site, which pages to read in the prep books, and then which exact LSAT problems to complete from the actual LSAT prep tests.
Steve, I actually largely build my syllabus on the basis of your plans.
Oh, awesome. That's great to hear. Excellent. Great. So
everything you said about the plan is basically what we've been doing and what they are used to do. We've started with logic games, we moved to logical reasoning, and we just started on reading comprehension with the understanding at the end of the semester. I count on them to doing the 4 practice tests on their own, hopefully in a small group. That's the goal. But we're doing the exactly your strategies I followed since you helped me when I started this class.
Perfect. I'm really happy to hear that. I'm glad it's been helpful for you all. A couple of other things I want to share with you. I have my website, the LSAT blog. My name is Steve Schwartz. I've also got the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. If you go to youtube.com/LSAT blog, you'll be able to check out the resources there. Maybe I can do a screen share and show you all as we finish up here. Here's the YouTube channel. And so I've got a ton of stuff there. Oh, look, it's playing already. So you can see I've got a ton of different playlists on everything LSAT. I have a bunch of discussions and interviews, including one with a former writer of actual LSAT questions, including one with a former NYU law admissions dean. And the LSAT Unplugged podcast is on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. I'll show you that on iTunes as well, so you can see what that looks like. So you can listen on the go during your commute in the car, whatever you can kind of check out. Again, I have lots and lots of episodes I'm releasing, as you can see, pretty much every single day. So more LSAT material than you could possibly ever want. That's my mission, is to overwhelm you with LSAT information for free. So that's what I'm doing. I hope you all find it helpful.
Thank you very much, Steve. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.